100,000 years ago, on a beach somewhere on the coast of what's now South Africa, a woman is threading small snail shells onto a piece of sinew. She's pierced each one by hand, with a stone tool, one at a time. It takes hours. She has no mirror. She lives in a world where the closest thing to entertainment is not dying, and she is spending an entire afternoon making jewelry. Why would she do that? Why would anyone, at any point in the brutal, resource-scarce reality of the Stone Age, burn hours of survival time on something you can't eat, can't use as a weapon, and can't build a shelter with? That's the question. And the answer is genuinely stranger than they thought it looked nice. Because those shells we just described are real. They're called Necarious shell beads, and they're the oldest confirmed jewelry on Earth. And what they reveal about the people who made them is not what you'd expect. Here's the first surprising thing. These shells weren't decoration in the way you're picturing it. Researchers examining them found consistent wear patterns, the kind of smoothing and polish you only get from an object being worn against skin or clothing repeatedly over a long period. Not stored, not admired on a shelf. Worn, constantly, on a body, in a world where every single hour of daylight mattered for survival. And here's the part that should genuinely stop you. These shell beads have been found at multiple sites across huge distances, some found hundreds of kilometers from the nearest coastline where the shells could have originated, which means someone carried them, traded them, passed them from group to group, inland, away from the ocean as something worth having. Before writing, before agriculture, before permanent settlements, humans were already running a supply chain for jewelry. Let's get into the actual theory, because there isn't just one, and the honest answer is that jewelry probably did several jobs at once, which is exactly why it stuck around for 100,000 years and never went away. Theory 1, and probably the oldest function, identity. Not, this is my personal style, identity, group identity. Who you belong to. In a world with no flags, no uniforms, no passports, no way to instantly tell a stranger, I'm part of your tribe, don't kill me. A specific pattern of shells worn a specific way could function as a badge. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer societies with similar bead traditions have found that specific bead patterns, colors, and arrangements often signal specific group membership, marital status, or social rank, readable at a glance by anyone who shares the cultural code. If you saw the right pattern of shells on a stranger approaching your camp, you knew something about them before they said a single word. That's not decoration. That's a security system. Theory 2, status. Jewelry that took hours to make, using materials that had to travel long distances, was expensive in the most literal sense. It cost time and effort that could have gone toward food, shelter, or rest. And here's the thing about anything that's expensive to produce and impossible to fake quickly. It becomes an honest signal of resources. If you're wearing jewelry that took someone a full day to make, or that came from 300 kilometers away through multiple trading hands, you're broadcasting something real about your group stability, your trade connections, or your own free time. In a world where survival was the full-time job, having leftover hours for a beach afternoon spent drilling shells was itself a flex. Now here's a detail that most people never hear, and it might be the strangest one in this entire video. At Blombo's cave in South Africa, alongside some of these ancient shell beads, archaeologists found pieces of ochre engraved with deliberate crosshatch patterns, dated to roughly the same period, around 100,000 years ago. The patterns on the ochre and the way certain beads were selected and arranged show signs of shared symbolic thinking. Some researchers argue this means jewelry wasn't just personal or tribal. It might have been one of humanity's very first written languages, in the loosest sense, a way of encoding meaning onto an object that could be read by someone else without a single word being spoken. Let that sit for a second. Before cave painting as we usually picture it, before anything resembling writing, Someone was already trying to put a message on their body that other humans could read. Theory 3, and this one is almost uncomfortably practical: mate selection. In evolutionary biology, ornamentation across the animal kingdom frequently signals genetic fitness. Remember the peacock's tail? A trait so costly to produce and maintain that only a genuinely healthy individual can afford it. Some anthropologists argue early human jewelry worked on a similar principle, just translated into cultural terms instead of pure biology. If you had the skill, patience, and social connections to acquire and produce elaborate ornamentation, that said something real about your capabilities as a potential partner or parent. Resourcefulness, patience, social standing, access to trade networks. It wasn't about looking pretty. It was a costly, hard to fake advertisement of exactly the traits that mattered for surviving and raising children in that world. Here's where it gets even weirder, and this connects the whole thing together in a way that should genuinely reframe how you think about your own earrings or necklace. Jewelry might be one of the earliest pieces of evidence we have for symbolic thought itself. The ability to let one thing represent another thing that isn't physically present. A shell isn't food. A shell isn't a tool. A shell, worn in a specific way, represents an idea, group membership status, desirability, a message. That's an enormous cognitive leap. Chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, do not spontaneously decorate themselves with symbolic meaning. No other animal on Earth does what that woman on the beach was doing 100,000 years ago. She wasn't just making an object. She was encoding an abstract concept into a physical form that another human being could decode just by looking at her. So now flip forward roughly 70,000 years because the story doesn't stop at shells. And this is where the practice becomes something genuinely global and genuinely obsessive. As Homo sapiens spread out of Africa and across the planet, jewelry making didn't stay simple. It exploded into local materials and local meaning everywhere humans went. In Russia, at sites like Sungir, roughly 30,000-year-old burials have been found containing literally thousands of individually carved ivory beads sewn into clothing. A single burial garment could represent an estimated 10,000 hours of labor. 10,000 hours on beads alone for one burial. That's not casual. That's one of the largest collective investments of human labor archaeologists have found from that period, and it went into decorating a dead body. Whatever jewelry was doing for these people, it mattered enough to spend that kind of time on someone who could no longer use it, wear it, or benefit from it in any practical sense. Which tells you something important. Jewelry was never just for the living. Across ancient cultures, from Siberia to Egypt to the Americas, burial jewelry shows up again and again, often more elaborate than anything the person likely wore daily. That points toward a fourth function layered on top of the others. Jewelry as a message to whatever came after death. A way of marking status, identity, or protection into the afterlife itself. Ancient Egyptians buried the dead with jewelry meant to protect and guide them through the underworld. Specific amulets tied to specific gods and specific protective functions. Not random decoration, but a coded toolkit for the journey ahead. The scarab beetle amulet, incredibly common in Egyptian burial jewelry, was directly tied to the god Khepri and symbolized rebirth. Literally jewelry designed to help you be reborn in the next life. That's not vanity. That's technology for a problem people believed was very real. Let's talk about materials for a second because the specific choice of material is almost never random, and this is a detail that gets skipped constantly. Gold across an enormous range of separate, unconnected ancient cultures. Egypt, Mesoamerica, parts of Asia, was consistently associated with the sun, with the divine, with something that doesn't tarnish or decay the way flesh does. Ancient Egyptians literally called gold the flesh of the gods. Wearing it wasn't just about wealth. It was about physically draping yourself in a material believed to be immortal, incorruptible, untouched by death and decay, worn by mortal, decaying humans as a kind of borrowed permanence. Lapis lazuli, an intensely blue stone that had to be mined specifically in what's now Afghanistan and transported enormous distances to reach Egypt and Mesopotamia, carried associations with the heavens, with night sky, with royalty, precisely because it was rare, foreign, and difficult to obtain, the same expensive to fake principle from 100,000 years earlier, just running on a bigger tray network with fancier rocks. Here's a detail that should genuinely surprise you if you've never heard it. Some of the earliest metal jewelry, copper ornaments found at sites in the Balkans dating back roughly 7,000 years, actually predates metal tools. Read that again. Humans were making jewelry out of metal before they were reliably making metal weapons or metal tools for everyday survival tasks. Ornamentation wasn't a byproduct of metallurgy. In some cases, it might have been the reason people started experimenting with metal in the first place. The practical uses came later. Riding on technology first developed to make something shiny and meaningful to wear. Now here's the theory that ties every single thread of this together, and it's worth sitting with because it reframes jewelry from primitive vanity into something much closer to essential social infrastructure. Humans are, more than almost any other species on the planet, obsessed with signaling. We are constantly, compulsively broadcasting information about ourselves to the people around us. Our group, our status, our intentions, our availability, our history, using every tool available. Posture, voice, scarring, tattoos, clothing, and yes, jewelry. Long before written language, long before complex verbal communication, humans needed fast, visible, portable ways to transmit social information at a glance. A shell necklace could say, I belong to this group, instantly, across a language barrier, across a chance encounter in unfamiliar territory, without a single spoken word. That is an enormous evolutionary advantage in a world where misidentifying a stranger as friend or foe could get you killed. And once that basic signaling function existed, cultures didn't just keep it simple. They immediately, universally, made it more complex. Every human culture ever studied, without exception, developed some form of body ornamentation. Rings, earrings, necklaces, bracelets, piercings, painted symbols worn on the body. That universality is the tell. If jewelry were purely a cultural accident, some invention one clever group stumbled onto and others simply never bothered with, you'd expect huge swaths of humanity to have skipped entirely. They didn't. Every single documented human culture across every continent independently arrived at some version of wearing meaningful objects on the body. That's not coincidence. That's evidence of something deeply, structurally human, a drive that predates all of our modern categories of fashion, art, and status because it was solving a much older, much more urgent problem. How do I tell you who I am before you have any other way of knowing? So let's come back to that woman on the beach 100,000 years ago, drilling holes into snail shells with a stone tool while the rest of her group hunts, gathers, and tends the fire. She's not wasting the afternoon. She's manufacturing information. Every hole she drills, every shell she selects, every pattern she strings together is a small act of communication aimed at every future stranger who will ever look at her and need to know, instantly, without words, who she is, what group protects her, what she's worth, and what she's capable of. That single piece of jewelry she finishes by sunset will outlive the hunt that happened that same day. It might get traded 300 kilometers inland. It might end up buried with someone's grandchild a generation later, still carrying whatever meaning she encoded into it the day she made it. And every single piece of jewelry you own right now, the ring, the earrings, the chain around her neck, is running on the exact same ancient operating system. You are still, in the most literal sense, broadcasting information about who you are to every stranger who looks at you. Using a technology invented on a beach in Africa 1,000 centuries before anyone thought to write a single word down. What a piece of jewelry you wear that actually means something. Tell me in the comments. I read everyone.